Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Giallo enthusiasts. It's Tanner Leeser, your host for The King in Giallo. This is episode 12 of the Forgotten Giallo film series, 1969, part 3. And I've got two gialli I'd like to highlight. As always, thanks in no small part to Troy Howarth's book on Giallo cinema, So Deadly, So Perverse, 50 Years of Italian Giallo Films, Volume 1, 1963 to 1973. Like this video and subscribe to The King in Giallo, and do ring that notification bell so those lords of the algorithm may bestow their blessing upon me and you continue to be presented with weekly Giallo content. This all helps me build my brand here as I fight to get to 1,000 subscribers and get one step closer to monetization here on YouTube. On to the video. The first of two gialli and ninth of 1969 is Psych Out for Murder, an Italian and Argentinian co-production. The film is directed by actor Rossano Brazzi under the pseudonym of Edward Ross. He also wrote the film along with Diana Crispo, Renato Poselli, Biagio Proietti, and Piero Regnoli. The music for the original version is by Benedetto Giglia, and for the American cut, it is rescored by Joanna Nealand. The cast of players are Adrian La Russa as Liscia, Rossano Brazzi as Brigoli, Nino Castelnuovo as Mario, Paola Pitajora as Giovanna, Alberto de Mendoza as Francesco, and Idelma Carlo as Laura. The plot follows Liscia on her journey of vengeance against those who wronged her. What happened, you may ask? Well, she got mixed up in a sex scandal which didn't reflect well on her father, Brigoli, who is a well-respected businessman who was hoping to break into politics. In order for him to try and save face, he had his daughter committed. Liscia is now out and seeking retribution on all those who conspired to have her sent away. Psych Out for Murder is regarded as one of these obscure and hard-to-find giallo films we've discussed previously. There was a limited VHS release, but this was of the US cut, which is drastically different from the original print, which saw the addition of numerous scenes against the wishes of the director, of course, and as a result of this, the film's original pacing and rhythm is completely off. As many thrillers of the proto-giallo 1960s, this story is less about twists and turns and more focused on a psychological study of its main character. The characters who surround Liscia are mostly unlikable and despicable in nature and behavior, which works to garner sympathy for Liscia, but she is presented as being something of a brat in the first act, and as the story unfolds, she proves to be incredibly manipulative in how she goes about her plans. The audience is left with little to no scenes to actually get close to her or learn anything about her on a deeper level. In her endeavors, she's not above seduction in order to charm individuals to do her bidding, but perhaps because the film makes attempts to safeguard her character, these scenes come off as half-assed because they never commit totally to the manipulations, and what we are left with is something which resides somewhere between a character drama on one end and a weak attempt at an exploitation film at the other. The film is not garbage, however, just a bit directionless with its intentions. All aspects of the film seem to be handled well enough, the directing is fine, the actors are doing their parts believably enough, and the musical score drives the plot forward. The script is competent, but just doesn't delve as dark into what these films have typically desensitized us to expect. The movie takes its time to get going, but once things are set in motion, it could be said to keep your attention, and the ending is surely memorable. Rossano Brazzi appeared in the giallo Dark Purpose, 1964, but this film would be his first and last effort at directing a giallo. In 1966, Brazzi had transitioned to director, beginning with The Christmas That Almost Wasn't, which was hilariously riffed by Mystery Science Theater 3000 on their Netflix revival. In that film, Brazzi also plays the villain, Phineas T. Prune. His next film as director was Criminal Affair, 1968, followed by Psych Out for Murder the following year. This would be his final directing credit. He used the name Edward Ross for the film, likely because of his disapproval over the US alterations. Ted Nealand is credited in the US cut as the co-director, and the theory is that he directed the added scenes, which mostly showcase Liscia in the asylum. Not a whole lot is known of Nealand's work in general. He directed The Mysterious House of Dr. C, 1966, based on the ballet Capella, a Spanish-made film starring Walter Slezak. Let's talk about Nealand's added scenes. Firstly, they do not add anything to the plot of the film. The original film scenes were dubbed afterwards, but the newly filmed scenes have sound recorded on the spot. What does it add? Nudity. A bathtub masturbation scene. These scenes you see were so vital to the US cut that much of the original material had to be cut or edited down to make way for these vital moments. As such, the pacing is a bit scattered to the wind. Added to this debauchery are lyrics and singing to what was originally a damn fine instrumental track. The music was scored by Ted Nealon's wife, Joanna Nealon. Adrienne LaRussa was born in 1948 in New York City. She began acting on General Hospital, the soap opera, then did La Pecora Nera, 1968 by Italian director Luciano Salce. She would star in Lucio Fulci's controversial film Beatrice Cenci, 1969. She has stated that she had a difficult time working with Fulci, who was mighty temperamental, and the two were constantly butting heads. No surprise, she ended up returning to America, where she mostly did television appearances as special guests. She made an appearance in The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976 by Nicholas Roeg. After the 60s, she never quite achieved any noteworthy roles. She ended up retiring in 1991. Unfortunately for the movie, LaRussa is kind of one-dimensional in her portrayal and doesn't give enough to incite passion into the role. The final Giallo for this video, 10th of 1969, is A Rather Complicated Girl, or just simply A Complicated Girl. The film is directed by Damiano Damiani, who likewise wrote this film along with Alberto Silvestri and Franco Ferrucci, and based upon a story by Alberto Moravia. The music is crafted by Fabio Borgazzi Fabor. The cast includes Catherine Spock as Claudia, Jean Sorel as Alberto, Florinda Balkan as Greta, Gigi Proietti as Pietro, and Maria Quadra as Marina. The plot is centered around a newly forming relationship between Alberto and Claudia. The issue is Claudia has been in one of those on-off relationships with Greta, but Claudia is beginning to feel like that is going nowhere, and so she wants to break it off for good. Things are not as simple as that, and she hints to Alberto that it would be easier if Greta simply wasn't around. Hint, hint. Alberto ponders how he can get rid of Greta once and for all, but he questions whether Claudia is legit about what she says, or perhaps this is entrapment and he will be the fall guy. Alberto Moravia, born in 1907, was sick with tuberculosis as a 9-year-old, which left him bedridden until about 14 years of age. During those 5 years, books became his escape from reality, which invigorated him to become a writer himself. He published his first book in 1929, but his career was halted by the stranglehold of Italian fascism, which, much like the Giallo paperbacks of the era, had issues with his writings. After the war, he received recognition for 2 books, the first being The Conformist, 1951, which was many years later adapted into a film by Bernardo Bertolucci in 1970, and the second book being Racconti Romani, 1954, which was a compilation of several of the writer's short stories. In the next decade, numerous of his stories were adapted into film. La Ciociara was made into Two Women, 1960, by Vittorio De Sica, and Il Disprezzo was made into Contempt, 1963, by Jean-Luc Godard. In 1959, Moravia published a story as part of Nuovi Racconti Romani, entitled La Marcia Indietro, which held a magnifying glass to the undesirable and hidden elements of Italy's upper-class elites. In 1984, he would begin to dabble in politics. However, later he passed away in 1990. A Rather Complicated Girl is an adaptation of the previously mentioned La Marcia Indietro. Some particulars are changed, but the overall theme remains intact. Gialli like this focus on wealthy elites, mostly lounging about, who are adept at complaining about their lives and masters at stabbing each other in the backs, which usually all ends in bloodshed. Damiano Damiani turns this up to 11 by highlighting the superfluous excesses of these types. Despite the violence being mostly restrained, the censors did not take kindly to the harsh critique of the upper echelons of Italian society, and as a result, the film was seized, stirring up controversy at the time of its release. Some would argue this censorship was because of the frivolous sexuality of the main characters, but as we have discussed several times, this was not a rare trope to employ in mature films of this era, and to counter that point, this movie is rather lax with it compared to other films of the time. Perhaps because the film was not marketed as a giallo or exploitation film, harsher scrutiny was then applied to it, not too unlike the writings of Moravia himself, which inspired it. The film establishes a wonderful type of dreamscape through its telling, which is aided by the gorgeous cinematography, the soundtrack, and the editing, which all work together and towards the same goal. Damiano Damiani was born in 1922, studied to be an art director, and entered films in 1946. He did numerous documentary films, but upgraded to his first feature film in 1960, Lipstick, a neo-realist type film which sort of paved the way thematically for Giallo films. Damiani really started to hit success with his 1971 polizieschi thriller Confessions of a Police Captain, which pulled no punches in its scathing exposure of the Italian legal system and its shortcomings. Damiani almost always took on social themes in his stories, but he would marry them to commercially produced films, which made several critics hesitant to ever qualify him as a bona fide auteur. Despite this, he always found a way to meld his highbrow ideas and themes with commercially viable productions, which were both polished in presentation and entertaining for wider audiences. The same could hardly be said for many other directors working near him. The collapse of the Italian film industry pushed him to work mostly in television in the 1980s, and he kept working even into the 2000s before he passed away in 2013. This film proves to be well crafted as much so as his later films. The pacing is always driving forward, the tone is light yet engaging, and the themes are addressed without drawing attention to them in an artificial way. Jean Sorel proves once again why he was so sought after for these types of films, and here he brings home one of his greatest performances. Catherine Spock gives her best performance. She was born in 1945, debuted in 1959, and ascended to fame with Il Sorpasso, 1962 by Dino Risi, and Circle of Love, 1964 by Roger Vadim. She appeared in an earlier Damiani film, also an adaptation of Moravia, The Empty Canvas, 1963. She was also a gifted singer and performed songs for musicians such as Ennio Morricone. She would later appear in The Cat o' Nine Tails, 1971 by Dario Argento. Catherine Spock was still in high demand even recently, still being cast in films and television, before she passed away in 2022. Florinda Bolkan was born in 1941 in Brazil and rose quickly to stardom after appearing in Candy, 1968 by Christian Marquand. The Love Circle, 1969 by Giuseppe Patroni Griffi. Un Detective, 1969 by Romolo Guerrieri. The Damned, 1969 by Luchino Visconti, and Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion, 1970 by Elio Petri. She would then appear in the gialli A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, 1971, and Don't Torture a Duckling, 1972, both by Lucio Fulci. She also stars in one of the most underrated and obscure giallo films, Footprints on the Moon, 1975 by Luigi Bazzoni. Bolkan continued acting until around the 2000s. Beyond acting, she delved into writing, producing, and directing with the 2000 film I Didn't Know Toruru. And that is part 3 for 1969. I hope you learned something new. If you are interested in watching these movies, look them up online. And if you do watch them or you've already seen them, I invite you to leave your thoughts on them in the comments. Follow The King in Giallo on Instagram and give a like to The King in Giallo on Facebook. Subscribe here on YouTube if you aren't already, and join me every week for new Giallo film content. Upcoming content on The King in Giallo will be the overview, review, and Giallitali for the 1969 Perotto Giallo So Sweet, So Perverse, directed by Umberto Lenzi, his second Giallo with Carol Baker. Thank you very much for your continued support. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
No.